She had conquered 3 star systems. She had executed warlords without blinking. She had never, in 400 years of life, asked anything of anyone. Until she watched a human lift a collapsed bulkhead with his bare hands to pull a dying child out from the wreckage. And then she did something that shook her entire empire. She said, "Please." Today you're going to hear the full story of Commander Vetharak, sovereign of the Keth Dominion, architect of the Pale War, and the most feared living being in 6 sectors of explored space. And you're going to find out exactly what happened when she crossed paths with Marcus Hale, a human logistics sergeant with no combat decorations, no political rank, and absolutely zero understanding of how much danger he was in. How the meeting happened, what she saw that broke 4 centuries of emotional armor, and why Marcus's response became the single most discussed diplomatic event in the history of the Keth people. Stay with me. This one pays off. To understand why any of this matters, you need to understand what Vetharak was. The Keth are not a species that evolved gentleness. They came from a tidally locked world, one half frozen, one half burning, and a thin band of survivable land running between them like a scar. For 1,000,000 years, the Keth fought over that scar. Every resource, every calorie, every breath of warm air was contested. They didn't just survive. They optimized for domination. Their neural architecture literally rewards the sensation of winning at the cost of another. Compassion wasn't selected out. It never had a chance to develop in the first place. Vetharak was born into the ruling caste. By the age of 12, which in Keth terms is barely past infancy, she had already watched her mother execute 3 rivals at a formal dinner. By 50, she commanded a fleet. By 100, she'd negotiated the Pale War ceasefire entirely through implied threat. No shots fired. Just a calm, measured conversation in which every other party slowly realized that she was the most dangerous thing in the room, and that she knew it with complete serenity. She was not cruel for sport. That's an important distinction. Cruelty for sport is emotion. What Vetharak practiced was something colder. Pure functional dominance. She removed obstacles. She rewarded utility. She maintained order through the absolute certainty that she was always the apex. By the time she encountered humans, she was 412 years old, in perfect health, and utterly certain that the universe had nothing left to show her. She was wrong. And the thing that proved it didn't come dressed in armor. It came wearing a dirty logistics uniform and bleeding from a cut above his eye. The Keth Dominion and the Terran Collective had been in a cold diplomatic relationship for about 11 years at that point. Not allies. The Keth didn't really do allies. But not enemies either. More like neighbors who acknowledge each other's property lines while each privately believing the other will eventually need to be dealt with. Vetharak was touring a joint humanitarian operation on Drivak 4, a planet in the neutral band that had just suffered a catastrophic tectonic event. 7 million people. 300,000 dead in the first 6 hours. Another million at risk. She was there for political optics. The Dominion wanted resource rights to Drivak's mineral deposits. Showing up to help looked good. Her advisors had planned a controlled, visible 4-hour visit. She would observe relief operations, speak to a few local officials, and depart with suitable footage. She was not supposed to be anywhere near the eastern collapse zone. The route changed because of a secondary quake, a 7.1 that hit while her transport was in the air and took out the main landing pad. Her pilot rerouted to the only stable ground within range, which happened to be 200 meters from a collapsed residential structure in Drivak City's eastern district. That's where she found the humans. Specifically, That's where she found Sergeant Marcus Hale of the Terran Collective's 14th Logistics Support Group, who was not supposed to be doing what he was doing. Logistics support doesn't do search and rescue. They move supplies. They manage inventory. They are explicitly, in 3 separate sections of Terran military doctrine, instructed not to engage in structural entry operations without specialized training. Marcus Hale was not thinking about doctrine. He'd heard a child screaming from under 4 meters of collapsed ferrocrete. The rescue teams were 8 minutes out. The child had been screaming for 11 minutes, and somewhere around minute 9, the screaming had become a lot quieter. So Marcus did the only calculation that made sense to him. A kid was dying, and he was here. He went in. What happened next, Vetharak would replay in her memory more times than she had replayed any battle, any negotiation, any moment in 400 years of living. Because what she saw didn't make sense, not in any framework she had for understanding living beings. Here's what she saw from 30 meters away. A human male, medium build, no powered armor, no exo-assist, no tools beyond a pry bar he'd grabbed from a relief supply crate, crawling into a gap in the rubble that looked physically impossible for his frame. She watched him assess the space with his eyes, shift his body in a way that dislocated his shoulders slightly to fit through an angle, then vanish into the structure. 40 seconds passed. Then the rubble shifted. Her guards moved forward. Unstable structure, potential collapse. The protocol was clear. She raised one hand and stopped them. Something was happening. The ferrocrete block, her sensors clocked it at approximately 340 kilograms, began to move. Not with tools, not with leverage, by hand. She could see his arms through a crack in the debris, the muscles under his uniform pulling against a weight that her cultural framework said no unaugmented being should be able to move. He wasn't lifting it cleanly. It wasn't a heroic, smooth motion. He was shaking. His boots were scrabbling for purchase on loose gravel. Blood was running down his forearm from somewhere under the rubble. He made sounds. She would later describe them as sounds she didn't have a category for. The sounds of an organism that has fully committed every available resource to a single action and is paying the cost in real time. 32 seconds. The block moved 8 centimeters, then 12. Then it shifted sideways with a grinding crash, and Marcus Hale pulled a 4-year-old Dravaki girl out of the rubble with his one functional arm, stood up, wobbling, and started walking toward the medical station. He didn't look around for applause. He didn't stop walking. He got to the medical station, handed the child to a field medic, said, and these words were recorded: "She needs fluids. Her right leg's broken in 2 places. Think her collarbone's cracked, but she's breathing fine." Sat down on a supply crate and waited quietly to be looked at. His shoulder was fully dislocated. He had a deep laceration on his right forearm. 2 fingers on his left hand were broken. He'd been inside that rubble for 78 seconds. Vetharak stood very still for a long time. Her lead advisor approached and asked if she was ready to proceed to the eastern observation point. She didn't answer, because she was experiencing something she could not name. Not in Keth. Not in the 6 other languages she was fluent in. Her species had a word for strength, vrethka, which translated more precisely as the capacity to impose your will on the world. They had words for courage in the tactical sense. They had words for sacrifice as a strategic calculation. They did not have a word for what Marcus Hale had just done, because what Marcus Hale had just done was not a calculation at all. There was no benefit to him. There was no audience he was performing for. He hadn't even seen her. There was no strategic gain. He had simply decided, alone, without fanfare, that a child's life was worth more than his own comfort and safety. And he had made his body agree with that decision, by force. Vetharak, apex predator, conqueror of systems, had never once in 400 years seen anything like it. And then she did something that her entire staff would spend the next decade trying to explain. She walked over to him. Marcus was sitting on the supply crate, letting a medic work on his shoulder, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up. Standing there was a Keth, which he recognized because he'd had the mandatory cultural briefing. Tall, about 2.5 meters. Gray-blue scaled skin, 4 eyes arranged in a slight arc. Dressed in the kind of clothing that meant either government or military or both. He did not know who she was. This is important. He did not recognize her rank insignia. He had not attended the political portion of the briefing where they explained that the supreme commander of the Keth Dominion would be on Dravak 4 today. He did not know that the being standing over him had, by conservative historical estimate, been personally responsible for the deaths of approximately 4 million people across the course of her career. All of them enemies, all of them combatants, all of them by Keth law legitimate targets. But still, 4 million. He just saw a tall alien looking at him. "Hey," he said. Vetharak had prepared nothing. For the first time in centuries, she was operating without a plan. She stood there for a moment that her advisors would later describe, in their personal logs, as terrifying. Because Vetharak not having a plan was not something that happened. Then she said, in Galactic Standard, which she spoke perfectly, "Why did you do that?" Marcus blinked. Do what? The structure was unstable. The rescue teams were minutes away. You had no equipment. The probability of your survival was not favorable. He looked at her like the question was strange. The kid was quieting down. Meant she was losing consciousness. That's bad. "Yes," Vetharak said. "But she was not your offspring. She was not your species. You had no obligation." And Marcus Hale, logistics sergeant, no combat medals, unremarkable service record, absolutely no idea who he was talking to, said something that cracked 4 centuries of architecture right down the middle. He said, "I don't need an obligation. She needed help." Vetharak was quiet. "That's not a calculation," she said finally. "No," Marcus agreed. "You could have died." "Yeah, you were aware of that." "Sure. And you went in anyway." He glanced up at her, a little confused, a little amused. "That's generally how it works." She stood very still again. Her advisor, a Keth named Surak, who had served her for 80 years and survived things most beings couldn't conceive of, reported later that this was the moment he became genuinely frightened. Not of Marcus, of what he was watching happen to Vetharak's face. She was an apex predator encountering, for the first time, something she was not equipped to measure. Marcus was just a guy waiting for his shoulder to be set. She said, "I require your designation and unit assignment." He gave them, mildly puzzled. She said, "I will be requesting your secondment to my personal staff." Marcus frowned. "I'm just logistics." "Yes," she said. "I think you might have the wrong person." "I do not make errors of that kind," she said, with a certainty that a person who knew who she was would have found immensely ominous. Marcus just shrugged his good shoulder. "Okay, you'll have to talk to my CO." "I will," she said. She walked away. Surak fell into step beside her and waited exactly 4 seconds before speaking, because 4 seconds was the polite Keth interval for allowing a superior to compose themselves. Then he asked, very carefully, Commander, what was that? And Veth Arak, who had not been uncertain about anything in living memory, said, I am not certain, but I intend to find out. Marcus Hale got his shoulders set, filed a standard after-action report noting minor injuries sustained during civilian assistance, and went back to work. He had absolutely no idea that the most powerful individual in 6 sectors had just decided she needed him near her. Or why? The secondment request hit Marcus's commanding officer, Captain Dana Reyes, like an atmospheric torpedo. She had to make 3 calls to confirm it was real. Then she had to make 2 more calls to confirm she was allowed to say no. The answer was technically yes. She could refuse. Humans weren't property. But the political weight behind the request was essentially gravitational. Marcus was briefed. He took it well, which itself said something. His response, recorded in Captain Reyes's notes, was, She seemed interesting, sure. Veth Arak's actual intention was observed and debated extensively by her staff, by Keth political analysts, and eventually by a generation of xenosociologists who wrote papers about it. The most straightforward interpretation, the one Surak eventually came to believe, was that Veth Arak had, for the first time, encountered a form of strength she hadn't known existed. Her entire existence was built on the assumption that all meaningful power was the power to impose will. She was the best at that. She'd proven it repeatedly. The universe made sense because she was at the top of the structure. And then, a medium-sized mammal in a dirty uniform moved 340 kilograms of ferrocrete and asked for nothing in return. No recognition, no advantage, no ledger entry, just a kid needed help. That wasn't weakness pretending to be strength. She had seen weakness. She knew its smell. This was something else entirely. The Keth concept of a mate, Vethkal, was complicated and not purely romantic. It meant more precisely a chosen partner of absolute trust, someone you chose to stand next to not because they were useful, but because their presence made you more complete. It was the rarest designation in Keth culture. Most Keth never found one. Many didn't believe the concept was real. Veth Arak had always believed it wasn't real. She revised that assessment on Drevak 4. What followed was, and I want to be honest here, deeply awkward for Marcus, mildly alarming for the Terran diplomatic corps, and utterly unprecedented in the history of Keth-human relations. Veth Arak did not do anything so simple as express affection. She was Keth. She demonstrated her intent of the Keth way. She began, methodically, to prove her value to him in every concrete way available to her. She redirected supply shipments to the 14th Logistics Group's operational area. She had 3 separate political obstacles removed from the Terran Collective's expansion near the neutral band. She arranged, through intermediaries, for Marcus's sister, who had been waiting 3 years for a medical procedure, to be seen by the best available surgeon. Marcus, who had not been told these things were connected, was very confused about why his life was suddenly getting better, when it was finally explained to him by a very apologetic Terran diplomatic liaison who had been briefed on the situation. His response was characteristically direct. "She should have just said something," he said. The liaison asked if he was receptive to the situation. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He thought about the being who had asked him, "Why did you do that?" Like it was the most genuinely puzzling question in the universe. He thought about those 4 eyes watching him with an expression he hadn't been able to read, but that he now understood had been something like awe. "Yeah," he said. "Tell her to just say something. Directly. I don't really do hints." The message was relayed. Veth Arak, sovereign of the Keth Dominion, took exactly 1 day to compose her response. She then sent Marcus Hale a message that was 11 words long. It said, "I would like to speak with you. Will you come?" Marcus replied in about 4 seconds. He said, "Yeah. Where?" That conversation lasted 6 hours. The details are not public record. What is public record is what happened at the next joint diplomatic summit between the Keth Dominion and the Terran Collective, where Veth Orak introduced Marcus Hale to the assembled delegates of both governments. Not as a representative, not as a political figure, but as Veth Kal. The hall was silent for a very long time. Then a Terran diplomat, who would later say she hadn't planned to speak, said, "Does he know what that means?" And Marcus, who had been briefed extensively, said, "Yeah, I know what it means." He said it the way a person speaks when they have made a decision and are completely at peace with it. Not a calculation, not a transaction, just a man who decided that something was worth showing up for. There's a reason this story resonates. It's not about the alien romance, though that's compelling. It's not really even about Marcus being strong or brave in any conventional sense. It's about what happens when something genuinely alien, something that has organized its entire understanding of the universe around power and imposition, watches a human being choose to care. Without an audience, without a reward, in the middle of rubble and dust and someone else's emergency. It's the HFY story beneath the HFY story. We're not scary because we fight well. We're not remarkable because we're durable, though we are. We absolutely are. We're strange, in the best possible way, because we show up for people who can't do anything for us. And to a universe that's never seen that, a universe that doesn't have a word for it, that might be the most disorienting strength of all. If this story hit you the way I think it did, stay around. Because there are more of them. There are always more of them.